Thank you for downloading the Start the Week podcast from BBC Radio 4. For more information, go to bbc.co.uk/Radio 4. Hello. Philosophy in public life today with three people who could hardly be better qualified. Bernard-Henri Lévy is surely France's best-known current philosopher, but a man whose media presence and enthusiasm for flinging himself into political causes, Darfur, Afghanistan, and recently Libya, has brought him a fair amount of abuse, something he discusses in an exchange of letters just published here. Mary Warnock, Baroness Warnock, who has brought a philosophical edge to arguments about euthanasia and medical experimentation and much else, explains her optimism about moral standards in an age of relativism and of less religion or less intense religion. First, however, the philosopher Roger Scruton has been looking at the environmental challenge facing mankind and attempts to reclaim green thinking and green living from the left. The keys to this are local action, family and nation, he argues. Roger, first of all, just describe to us why you think green or environmental causes have been adopted by the left.
I think they were adopted partly because they fitted at the time so well into the oppositional mentality which is prevalent always on the left. By espousing the green agenda, you could give yourself a kind of status as the defender of the oppressed against the powers that be, and it fed into the anti-capitalism, anti-business, anti-everything big feeling, which many people have always identified with the left-wing causes. The left-wing mentality is one of protection for the underdog against the person who's, oppressing him, who has all the advantages and so on. So it all looked, certainly during the 70s and 80s, very much as though it was the latest left-wing cause.
And of course, partly because of the sort of depredations caused by capitalism and big corporations around the world.
Absolutely, yes.
But you distinguish very much between aspects of American conservatism and European conservatism.
Yes, I think American conservatism has always been wrapped up with the American admiration for enterprise, for taking hold of problems and solving them yourself. And, of course, the respect for business and innovation that goes with this. So, inevitably, American conservatism has been much more closely intertwined with market economies and economic thinking.
Your book looks at the long tradition of nature-centred thinking, local arguments in conservative and literary thought. Yeah. But you make it absolutely central to your case that love of home, love of locality, love of family, and ultimately love of nation should be at the centre of environmental thinking.
Yes, and this is what I think of as the most dangerous part of our current environmental crisis, that people have used it as an excuse to turn their attention away from the things that they know and love towards great global schemes, treaties to be signed by everybody, and opposition on the global scale to business as such, and so on. And my view is that isn't not just futile in itself, but also taking our attention away from the things that we know how to deal with.
You give a list of examples of successful environmental action done more locally in the book. Yeah. Can you just talk about that a little?
Yes, obviously I take only certain parts of the world because I don't know the whole world. But in the case of England, I think one should be aware of the fact that our countryside, our landscape, was protected from predation during the 19th century by civic initiatives, by local groups who got together to use common law rights to protect it, by people like Ruskin and so on who advocated this in a vigorous way, by a whole movement of the national culture which was not dictated from above and had to fight for its place in politics, but which was one that was largely successful, ending with the foundation of the National Trust in the 1890s, partly as a result of Ruskin's work. And
then since then we've had the green circles around cities. We've had the Irish ban on plastic bags. I mean, there's a whole series of things, aren't there?
A whole series of measures which have maintained the English countryside as this extraordinary thing, which Stendhal, of all things, mentions in Le Rouge et le Noir. That this indescribable sweetness of the countryside was for him something utterly amazing.
Now, of course, a lot of people will then say, well, this is fine. You can look after your own patch. You can treat what is around you, community and landscape, as well as you can, and you can volunteer and be active. But nonetheless, these are global problems. Global warming, if that is happening, is a global problem, which therefore requires global action, and therefore, however much one may mistrust them, requires global politicians, global comings together of the kind that you're critical of.
Yes, I think, of course, global problems do require some kind of global remedy, if there is a remedy. But that means that you must search for that remedy from the right standpoint. If you yourself are not really interested in the environment, have not tried to understand just what it takes to protect it, then you're turning up at a treaty, at some kind of international discussion to sign a treaty, is probably not going to do any good. It's only if we have started from that premise of understanding and protecting what we know that we can actually understand how to do anything better.
Can I ask about pleasure? Because there is part of this case which worries a lot of people, which is particularly in bleak times when we're being told everything is going to get worse, our children are going to be poorer than we are, that democratic politics is simply offering people nothing but grim news. We don't know how democratic politics is going to respond to that. And on the environmental side, a lot of people might say that the Greens just bring us more misery. To think about green issues or conservatism issues, rather than conservative issues, is all about giving things up. Hair shirt, horrid.
Well, this goes on to topics which Mary has been writing about more effectively than I. But I would say that there are pleasures and pleasures, and the emphasis on the kind of consumerist pleasures that play such a large part in contemporary democratic culture is not necessarily what people in their better parts would choose. I think everybody understands happiness and the need for fulfillment and the need to be at peace and in good relation with the people one loves and that one lives with. But many people, I think, feel that the emphasis on pleasure has a long-term cost that we don't really want to pay, that we ought to, that it's time for us to get used to pursuing something more serious.
Bernard-Henri Lévy.
I cannot disagree more than I disagree with Mr. Scruton. The incredible sweetness of old nature. How can you say that? Old nature was misery, was plagues, was suffering. Nothing is more self-contaminated than nature left to itself. Read that Balzac, read Zola, maybe Dickens, and you will have the real portrait of what is locality, spirit of local. Spirit of local means slavery, means a submission to the order of the world. So, of course, you have to deal with techniques and so on. But my thinking is that in order to deal with the misery of technology, you need more technology, more science, and not back to old Mother Nature.
Well, I entirely agree that one doesn't go back to old Mother Nature, and of course the kind of nature that you're referring to was something that we have got over. But what Stendhal was referring to in Le Rouge et le Noir, when he was describing the English countryside, was a settled landscape in which people were, on the whole, at home. It was their the migration to the cities that disturbed all that.
People died at 40 years old in England, like in France.
Yes.
And when they remained in the countryside, they died at 38, maybe.
Gosh,
it
yes.
was terrible.
What, you don't think that people don't live too long now? Or what?
I don't think they live too long. No. I think they live too short. I think they live too short, believe me.
Mary Warnock.
My whole instinct is with Roger, partly because I think the Romanticism of the beginning of the 19th century, the mid-18th century onwards, we can't get over it. It's something that's actually in our bones. And I think this is probably just as much true in France as it is in England. I don't think one can shrug off the romantic movement.
And yet what we call nature is a shaped,
of course it
human
is.
changed
yes. But then there was
piece
also
of human culture.
There was also the concept of the sublime in nature, and the wild and the wilderness as well. But it's very difficult to reconcile in real life, I think, the longing for wilderness and solitude with the kind of desire that everybody should feel at home in their landscape. I think this is a very difficult conflict that can't really be solved.
What I'm defending is not some picture of wild nature, but the idea of human settlement, and settlement in cities is just as important.
This is absolutely right. And this, of course, is an equally German idea, isn't it?
I suppose it is, yes. Most ideas come from Germany originally.
Some come from England, a few come from France.
Yes,
What comes from Germany is the idea of Martin Heidegger saying that nature does not exist. Nature is always a cultured building. There is not nowhere something like a pure nature. It's a building. It's a construction of the spirit. So we have the choice between a bad nature and a good nature, and the best nature is probably the most sophisticated, the one in which the human beings have put so much of themselves that it becomes habitable.
I think Roger Scruton would agree with that, isn't it? Would you not?
Yes,
I think
I would.
But he says through locality, and I would say through opening to the world. This would be our difference.
Okay, but the place which is most open to the world is Paris. And that is also a fantastic locality which has been settled over many centuries and in which people find their home. One of the great problems that I discuss in the book is the way in which the urban environment is ceasing to be a settlement, especially in places like America. So we don't have that openness to the world.
Can I just, before we move on, ask about one other idea which is in your book. You're very critical of NGOs, non-governmental organisations, and people signing up for causes. Given that so few people now believe in political parties, that notion of an entire menu or agenda of causes bundled together, isn't it very important that people do have an outlet for action on a more than local scale, and that therefore these organisations fulfil a crucial role?
I think it depends on the nature of the organisation. I distinguish the big politicised NGO from the small charitable association, and I think that it is again a question of size as much as anything else, and whether the organisation serves its members rather than a great cause. I think serving its members is what keeps people into the volunteering spirit, makes them take charge of their own environment and their own condition, whereas the big NGOs, as it were, expropriate people's charitable instincts and devote them to causes that they don't necessarily understand.
Lady Warnock.
I think that this is true, and it's also perpetuated by education, particularly of small children. I mean, it's terribly easy for a teacher to say it's terrible to cut down the rainforests and so on. It's a cop-out, because they don't therefore engage with actual playground, classroom morality. They engage.
It's always somebody else's fault. It's a sin committed at a high level.
That's right, and children are taught from a very early age to think globally and not to think how they behave towards one another, but to think how awful it is that people cut down these rainforests or whatever it is. And I think that's a terrible, terrible moral mistake.
Well, let's turn to Bernard-Henri Lévy's book, which is an exchange of letters, which starts off feeling incredibly vituperative and angry. And then one realises there's something else going on here. And your co-author is Michel Houellebecq, very well known, I think, to a lot of... he's probably the French novelist who's cut through more than anything else, anybody else in this country. His kind of somewhat scandalous and wild novels are very popular. But Bernard-Henri, for those unfamiliar with your political work, you've done a huge amount of political work, not on the environment specifically, but more on causes of oppression and warfare around the world, Afghanistan, Angola, Darfur, and so forth. And a lot of this exchange of letters is about what happens to a public intellectual. Once you put yourself into the debate, you get a huge amount of abuse. The exchange starts off with Michel Houellebecq abusing you, and then you accept the abuse, and then you discuss the abuse. How much of this is because of the world of the internet and the anonymous blogger? How much has it always been part of the intellectual conversation and currency that people are simply irritated by big media figures?
No, I think it has not so much to do with the internet. Internet just increases a little the amount of anger and polemics and so on. But it was like this always. Think about... I try to tell it to Michel Houellebecq. When Michel Houellebecq complains about his fate and how the people are villain toward him, I quote the case of Oscar Wilde, who was much more than him and than me, abused and attacked and finished in jail, as you know, and he was one of the best spirit and best writers of this country. So it has always been like that. When a writer tries to make a step out of the rank of the murderers, as Frank Kafka says, a step aside the rank or the mob of the murderers, when a writer does that, it is unforgivable. In other words...
Why? Why is it unforgivable?
Why? Because the community wants the writer just to make the praise of the community, the laudatio of the community, the values which are admitted by everybody.
We want you to be entertainers. Entertainers,
or, as Stalin said, engineers of the soul. The writers were supposed to be in the 20th century by communists, Nazis and ecologists, engineers of the individual or collective soul. When a writer comes and says, I am just going to afford myself, I'm just going to say my tiny personal truth and to make a breach with that in the common sense, the community does not like, and then he's shot down. But this is the life of writing.
You don't think a lot of it's about power too, that people look at well-known writers and successful writers and think, here are people of power and influence. Furthermore, they're having a lovely time, they're enjoying themselves, and that a lot of the anger is about the power of the most powerful, most well-published writers. And a lot of the attacks are from writers who have not yet achieved or may never achieve the same kind of position.
Probably, but I would distinguish power and jouissance and pleasure. Power, writers have no power. They might often be writers or philosophers the most deprived of power of all those whom you see on radio and TV and so on. What is their power, frankly? Pleasure, yes. There is probably a hatred among the mob, what we call mob, Houellebecq and me in the book, against the image of jouissance. How do you say that in English? Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Okay. Delight. Yes, the image of delight. The image of delight might be unbearable for a lot of people. And what gives more delight? Few things. There is two. As I say in the book, there is two things which for me are equivalent and give as much delight. Is writing and making love. And we agree on that, Michel Houellebecq and me. One says writing and making love. The other says making love and writing. I let you guess which one. But the community And the fact that the two are made in the same stuff, in the same material, this idea we share it. So there is, of course, a jealousy against a woman or a man who comes and say, making love, which is the best thing in the world, and writing is the same. And I do that all day long. All day long.
I would say that there's a lot of sex in Houellebecq's novels, but very little love. I think that's old-fashioned way of describing it, which makes it look as though it really were part of jouissance. But, there's a kind of negativity as well, isn't there?
Yeah, but this is not a novel. This is a book where Houellebecq, as myself, we speak frankly and cash and all cards on table. And we both agree that, of course, sex without love is meaningless, is a desperate way of dealing with one's body. And the book begins, as you know, the book begins because one of us is completely desperate. This is the beginning. Houellebecq calls me one night in Paris and tells me more or less, I'm so desperate that I'm at the edge of committing suicide. And then he asked me for a meeting. We meet, we don't know each other yet, very little. And he explains me that life is a lost cause, that love does not exist in his life, that he is in the depth of despair. Yeah. His wife, his mistress, maybe leaving, his dog is ill, and so on.
This is a long therapeutic conversation where we don't have the wine in front of us, but we've got everything else, in effect.
I tell him, I can do nothing for your dog, nothing for your wife, nothing for your mistress. Because at the end of the day, he tells me the worst is that there is nobody to discuss with any longer, nobody to debate with any longer. The pleasure of the conversation, which is an English and a French art. Byron became famous with one night of a conversation. Yeah. Houellebecq says it no longer exists. So I tell him, for this, maybe we can try.
And you're testing each other. I'm just going to read out a little bit from the beginning so people can get a sense of the tone of some of this. The first letter starts from Michel Houellebecq to yourself, dear Bernard-Henri Lévy. We have, as they say, nothing in common except for one essential trait. We are both rather contemptible individuals. A specialist in farcical media stunts, you dishonour even the white shirts you always wear, and so on. And you reply, there are three possible approaches, dear Michel Houellebecq. Approach, well done, you've said it all, you're mediocre, I'm an nonentity, and in our heads there's nothing but a resounding void. We both have a taste for play acting, we could even be called imposters, and so on. So you're trying to say the worst things about yourselves that could be said.
We try to say the worst thing, we try also to... It's like a joke, this beginning of the book. We try to endorse, we try to prove, I suppose, we did not say it like this, but it is the case. We try to prove that the best enemies of each other's are not the reviewers of the books, which very often do not read them really, but that we can be the worst enemies and the best enemies of each other's and of ourselves. It's a lesson given to what Houellebecq calls a mob.
Yeah, it's very confessional, though you don't like confessional literature. In many ways, this is confessional literature.
Houellebecq likes it. I don't, but he drives me into confession. Yes, in a smooth way. I refuse at the beginning, and I must say frankly that I am driven into it, and I say things which I thought I would never say.
This is a book that would never have been written in English, would it, Roger Scruton?
No, that's exactly right. And of course, there is a paradox here in that, although I'm sure, Bernard-Henri, you're absolutely honest in describing the way in which you've been abused and badly received by the French public, there is a huge contrast between the French intellectual and the English intellectual in this matter. You can pick up a telephone in Libya and speak to your president and say, bomb this ghastly place. If I could do the same, whatever ghastly place I was in, pick up a telephone and get the powers that be to bomb my surroundings, I'd feel I'd made it. And there's a way in which the French intellectual is always there at the top. it's not surprising, therefore, if he inspires envy. You know, I don't think we English writers inspire envy. Nobody has the faintest idea as to what kind of a person it would be who would write a book.
This is absolutely right. I mean, it really, what I got out of the book mainly was the utter foreignness of your writing. It's completely alien from anything that the English can do. I mean, the influence that you have, carrying with it the vilification, which in fact I think you probably enjoy, is something that couldn't happen here. Roger and I walk around and have no influence whatsoever on what's going on, whereas your name...
Oh, but if I may say so, Baroness, you've been accused of being, you know, one of the most titanic egos of our troubled age and a destroyer of morality. And all your stuff with the embryology, you've had a huge...
Right. So we are brothers and sisters, Baroness. I like being... This is exactly the words which are used against me in France. Yeah. So we are in a real fraternity there. Well, I am taking the hands of Baroness, I must say, for the heroes. We are shaking hands.
There's a certain amount of physical contact going on in the studio.
Eye contact, physical contact in the studio with Baroness and my modest person.
But I think there is something in common between you and me, which is our Jewishness. My mother was Jewish, and I understand entirely the fact that you are an outsider and love it, get pleasure from being an outsider.
But look, in England, you have also, you cannot say that there is no comparison. Look at somebody like Salman Rushdie, English citizen. He did not launch a war like I contributed to do against Gaddafi, but he did much more. He launched... He was not volunteer for that, of course. A worldwide wave of hatred and madness against himself.
Yeah, nearly destroyed himself in the
quite.
Yes. So look at this butterfly effect. One writer provoking such a huge thunderstorm worldwide. Martin Amis, another writer, English writer, who has quite a great role in the affairs of the world. Look, in music, they are not writers, but people like Bono, they are Irish, I must say. But Bono or Bob Geldof, they are sort of public intellectuals in England.
But they're not intellectuals.
But they are musicians,
Roger.
They are artists.
I think, yes, you say something very important in one of your letters, that you draw attention to René Girard's theory of the sacrificial victim, and this is one of the great intellectual
explain it to us.
Great intellectual achievements of post-war French culture. Girard's view that we can only understand the concept of the sacred, which is absolutely vital to all of us, if we trace it to its origins in the sacrificial right, the sacrifice of a victim. And Girard builds on this a whole theory of modern societies and a kind of vindication of Christianity as the answer to our problems. And of course, it's very obvious from the way you write, Bernard-Henri, that you are preparing yourself as a sacrificial victim. And I think it is quite right for Mary to make the connection with Jewishness here. That you're getting ready as the scapegoat for that mass attack, which will both destroy you and also vindicate you, make you into something which is the great purifier of the race.
Except that, you are right, except that one of the differences between Welbeck and me is that Welbeck believes that he will be defeated by the mass attack. He believes that he has already lost against the mass attack, and I believe that the writer always wins at the end. I am optimistic in a way. I think that
Welbeck, it might be said, a bit like Rushdie, is somebody, I mean, more so than Rushdie, is somebody who has chosen to go on to the attack. Particularly against Islamism and other causes, in a very aggressive way. Yeah. I mean, he's leading with his chin, as we say.
As a result, lives in exile.
Lives in exile. But at the end, he will win. Rushdie won. If you, in the battle, in the arm wrestle, launched unwillingly, because he did not want it, by Salman Rushdie against the regime of Ayatollahs. You will see very soon Rushdie will have won. So my theory in Public Enemies is that the writer, the artist, always wins against the mob.
Well, let's turn to another writer who will or will not win, we will see, has launched a rather less aggressive assault than Salman Rushdie. In a lecture at the University of York, Lady Warnock, you are looking, I mean, you spend a lot of your life in public looking at what happens to morality post a religious age, what happens in a secular age to morality, whether there are common sources of morality. And this is, in essence, an optimistic lecture. You argue that ultimately empathy is an attribute of humanity which survives changes in ideology, changes in religion.
Yes, I think I do believe that. I think I am optimistic. But I also think it's tremendously important that people recognise where their morality comes from. And the habit of deriving it from Christianity in this country goes very deep. Obviously, our history is of a Christian society, and so people think morality and religion go together, and they kindly adopt Judaism as well, because they recognise that Christianity is an offshoot. But I think it's very important that people should, right from childhood, recognise that being morally good is something that is desirable and that they want to do it. And this is nothing to do with religion. At least, I mean, it's to do with religion, but it doesn't come from religion. Because then, otherwise, children who are brought up without any religion at all may be in danger of casting off morality as well. And lest
this seem soft-edged, you argue that concepts such as selfishness and shame and embarrassment and almost, it seems to me, a sense of evil are essential.
Yes, I think so, and a recognition that we're all tempted to be bad rather than good, and therefore we maybe gradually come to want to be good rather than bad. And unless that happens, I think there is no future for morality at all.
There is an argument quite popular at the moment that we should almost get rid of the notion of evil and substitute lack of empathy as a result, and that we should look at people simply as being on a spectrum between highly empathetic and being autistic, then ultimately psychopathic. And that this is, as it were, a medicalised, more scientific approach to questions of morality.
Yes, and it goes with a kind of... I entirely recognise this, what you're saying, and it goes with the notion that we must all be decent to one another and sympathetic and tolerant and welcome multiculturalism, because otherwise it does harm to the self-image of the people we are disagreeing with. And I mean, the difference between that and your book is enormous, because the self-image is fed by conflict in your book. But I think I don't like this therapeutic notion of being decent to people. I really believe that human beings are different from other animals and that they're capable of being sympathetic with other people and understanding their sorrows and wishing to do good. But it is a matter of wishing to do good rather than wishing to make things worse.
And connected to this, you are also critical of the rights culture.
Well, I am, because I think that to claim a right is to claim that somebody has bestowed on you a right, or a law has been passed that gives you a right. And I'm very near to saying, like Jeremy Bentham, that to talk about natural rights or human rights is nonsense on stilts.
Yes.
Because you're always presupposing that somebody has conferred this right on you, and you're jolly well going to stand up for your rights. So it's essentially not necessarily a selfish attitude to claim your rights, because you can claim other people's rights as well. But it is claiming something for yourself as well.
In the context of what you're saying, I mean, you make a very powerful case for what might be called traditional morality, standing to one side of religion in a more secularised country. What isn't clear is how it gets taught, who teaches it, how it's passed on. I mean, we've been discussing all the way through the programme the role of philosophers in public life, but who does the teaching? What are the mechanisms if there aren't churches and Sunday schools and those traditional ways of passing on?
Well, there aren't Sunday schools, but there are schools, and there are homes with parents. And I think the responsibility of teachers and of parents is absolutely enormous, because that's the way children learn to prefer being nice to people rather than nasty to people.
And assertive intellectuals in a kind of vigorous conversational culture can transmit those views to parents, to public figures, and tilt the balance of a society, or not?
I don't think public figures do much good, but I do think teachers, whether they're school teachers or university teachers, have an enormous effect, because people don't rethink their whole way of behaving or their philosophy after they stop being undergraduates. They tend to go back to what they were originally taught. So I think the role of teaching is absolutely enormous, whether by parents or by professional teachers. But I don't think that philosophers particularly have any part to play in this.
What a disappointment. Bernard-Henri.
I followed very carefully what you said. My opinion is that there is two major diseases in modern age, two terrible catastrophes: the will of purity and the medicalization. Yes. The will of purity, which means the nostalgia of lost purity, which, by the way, matches with ecology, the will of purity, the fact not to admit that there is a part of evil which belongs to human nature and to human communities, the will of, and number two, medicalization, which means replacement of the notion of evil by the notion of illness. Immediately, when somebody says there is no longer evil, there is illness, the society is not struck by an original evil, but is struck by a provisional illness, and the illness can be cured. I have the good medicine, I am the good doctor, I am the good clinician who is able to help you to get rid of the illness. Then you enter in what the 20th century called totalitarianism. It may be red, it may be brown, it may be green, as the ecologist or as the Islamist. As soon as you have la volonté de guérir, the will to cure the world from this old theologic idea of evil, as soon as you have this, you enter in the path of the worst.
No more books and only pills.
Exactly. And vive les livres against the pills. Vive les livres and no to the pills. This is my motto this morning. Baroness.
Yes,
Roger.
I totally agree with that, but of course it does suggest that our problems are philosophical. I mean, the medicalisation of the moral life is a big philosophical mistake. And we philosophers are perhaps partly to blame for it by hiding away, doing our formal logic and so on, instead of being out there. I mean, Mary is a great exception, but she has a place in the House of Lords, so she's lucky. But, most of us have not made the effort of going out there and saying, look, this way of talking about human beings doesn't merely misrepresent their nature, it makes it impossible to transfer moral knowledge.
And is this partly because of the fashionable nature of sort of biological determinism, neo-Darwinism, the sense that everything can be explained by brain science?
That's part of it. I mean, the brain all the brain imaging stuff is a kind of apology for philosophy, conducted by people who've never understood a philosophical question and think that you can understand these things by poking away at the brain or putting an fMRI scanner on it. Yes, I mean, and that is a philosophical defect. And how do we confront it is the great question.
Yes, I think the medicalisation of human nature is the most terrible thing. I absolutely agree with what's been said, but this is, in fact, all our practical life is not based on that hypothesis. It's based on the view that we can do better than.
Yes.
Yes,
But if we don't have the religious underpinnings that have been there explicitly for so long, what we need is a philosophical language, isn't it?
That is absolutely right, and I think we've got to.
And who can provide that other than philosophers?
Yes, but I think
Philosophical and theological, because it is the same. Yeah. The questions of philosophy endorse the same old questions as the theology in the old ages. It's evil, the good, death and life. Yes. All these were linked to the question of God. So even if God is dead, you have the testament of God, and the testament of God means philosophy.
All right.
All right.
But the thing
let Mary Warnock come in.
And this we should teach.
I think, though, that the great value of religion, especially the religions that you and I have shared, so to speak, in our ancestors, the great value is that they call attention to the fact that human nature is made up of evil as well as good, and that we're constantly under temptation, that we can do something about resisting temptation. But religion
and that we are responsible for it.
Yes, and religion is a kind of storytelling version of what is a much more deep fact of morality, which is that people are bad as well as good.
I mean, the essence of the Christian faith is that you confess your faults and beg forgiveness for them. This is the first move in any morality.
But also that you should be ashamed of falling
is the original sin and the question of the negativity and of the evil. This is the best of the heritage of Judaism and Christianity to the secular world.
What fun we have had. The original evil, the original sin of radio is going on beyond your allotted slot, and we have come to the end of ours. So thank you all very much indeed. Mary Warnock, Bernard-Henri Lévy, whose Public Enemies book is out now, and Roger Scruton, whose Green Philosophy is published in the new year. Next week, the true spirit of the game. We're going to be talking about whether sporting idealism has lost out to corruption, drugs and celebrity, with Mihir Bose, Julian Savulescu, Jenny Hampton and Brian Moore. But for now, thank you and goodbye. Thank you for listening to this Radio 4 podcast. If you've enjoyed it, you might like to try others like it, such as In Our Time or Thinking Aloud, both of which are also available from the Radio 4 website.